So welcome, and we're going to talk today about what it means to, as facilitators, have this stargaze in our eyes as facilitators. How are we seeing the space, and how do we support other folks in their willingness to try new ways of being with each other? Welcome.
Thank you, Sage. So I'm just going to invite you, wherever you are, to think about what you need to do in order to just get here, whether that's closing your email, shutting off your Slack channel, whatever it is, just inviting you to be present. And I'm going to invite you to, we're going to take 3 breaths together. And wherever you are, I just want you to notice your feet on the ground. And as you breathe in, just allowing your belly to get really full with air, your lungs. And as you exhale, release the shoulders down. And so breathing in a second time. And as you exhale, release the hands. And a third time, breathing in. And this time, just release the hands and the shoulders together. So letting that feel loose. And I'm going to invite you just to close your eyes and just be here in your breath. And I want you to get I invite you to get an image in your mind's eye of going in to facilitate a difficult meeting. Perhaps you already know the sticking points. You've done your prep work. You know where the tensions are between participants. And just I invite you to see that room and feel your own body in that space. Perhaps this meeting is simply ill-timed due to the world unraveling and folks are struggling to be present. Perhaps the meeting is difficult content. Maybe it's both. And so I just invite you to just feel in your own body where the potential for transformation lives in this group space and also in yourself. See the faces of the people. And what do you as an individual need in order to be grounded and ready to hold that group as they move through the content that you have designed in collaboration with others? So what do you as an individual need? And then on your next inhale, I invite you to look up and shift your focus and imagine, what do they need? What will this group of bodies need in order to hold their collective work? What do you notice about their energy in the room? And what is actually possible for this group in this moment? And as you're observing all the energy of the group, notice what that does to your own body. Where does that collective energy live in you? And I invite you to zoom out a little further. So from yourself to the room and now to the work, and consider the collective impact that the work that this group of people is going to do is going to have for those who are not in the room right now. See the faces of who you're accountable to, who the decisions will impact. What is the big it that is bigger than the room and the people at this table that you are all meeting in service to? What's bigger than you, bigger than the group, that is really going to move this collective towards a bigger systems change? And just notice where that bigness lives in your body, that responsibility for whatever is larger. So we're just noticing how the energy moves when it's from you as an individual to the room, to the bigger sense of why you're doing this work in this moment with this group of people. Great. If you want to come back to your screens, it would be lovely to see your faces. and Odin.
Thank you, Ashley and Sage, for such a beautiful start. We're going to continue our beautiful start, and one of the things that we really like to do is get everyone grounded, and part of that is grounding you with each other and allowing you a chance to chat. So you're always welcome to be off video if you'd like to be. We were talking earlier about how zoomed out everyone is. And I also want to invite folks, if you were on a previous call, you might remember the mention of 20-20-20. So every 20 minutes, take at least 20 seconds and look somewhere 20 feet away. Want to encourage you to do that. But especially for what we're moving into now, which is dyads, I'd like to invite you to turn your video on and connect with the person you'll be placed with. And the question we'd like you to both explore for a couple of minutes each is, how would you describe your current and your aspirational facilitation style? So as you imagined yourself going into that room and being with those folks and what you need, what they need, what the world needs, how do you show up now, and how would you like to show up? I would also love if a couple of people just want to unmute and share. We'll do that and then move into a piece. We're going to have a slightly different structure today in the interest of showing you different structures that you can use and different tools and formats for your meetings. So if folks want to unmute and share anything that came up in this conversation, you're welcome to do that now. And then Sage and I are going to share a brief piece, and then we're going to go into a fishbowl conversation with the three of us. Anyone want to have their voice contribute to the conversation at this point, beyond what you've shared in chat?
Odin, could I actually invite Maria? Maria, there's something so I appreciate about that relationship between welcoming to transformational.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you could talk more about that.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ashley.
Oh, wow. Well, I think that I have, and I shared that one of my challenges is I have a voice disability. So I kind of enter facilitation, and I lost my voice 10 years ago. And so it's actually been a blessing. The pandemic's actually been relieved a lot of stress for me because I don't have to project very far anymore. Mm. So I think that I enter spaces a little vulnerable, and I translate it into just kind of creating a welcoming space. And I'd really like to be able to get to a space where kind of what you're talking about is like getting people having difficult confirmations and helping people get to kind of a transformation. And I just really, right now in this facilitation that I've done, I feel like I really want to support people in a way that I've never felt like a desire to support people as much in a facilitation. And I want them to be able to leave like after contact with me, like a little lighter. Like I've lightened their load a little bit. So that's what I was thinking in terms of transformational, like right now.
Thank you for sharing that, because I read that so differently. So I appreciate you being specific about what that meant for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it was, that was really a beautiful share. And I want to point out, just to, push pause, as we sometimes like to do, a fantastic facilitation technique on Ashley's part when I had said, oh, does anyone want to share anything? And it was, like a little bit of crickets, which is okay. No, we don't have a fear of silence. And sometimes people will speak up, but then directly calling on someone with a specific ask of like, hey, say more about that, is fabulous, especially in this context where, more than half of the folks have their video off. We don't know if you're here or not, or, having a snack and, kind of catching up on Netflix while this is playing in the background. So thanks, Ashley. So I want to move to Sage. We want to structure a little bit. Ashley started with a beautiful check-in, and we want to go a little deeper on that. And Sage and I will talk briefly about that, and then we'll do a fishbowl conversation.
So there are two things that I want to talk about in these few minutes. First, again, making transparent what we're doing for you all. Again, we have different practices. And one of the things that we've talked about earlier around emergent strategy is, what does it mean to build trust in these environments? Right? Like, how do you move at the speed of trust? What does that mean? And so one of the things that we do as a facilitation technique around building trust is try and put people in conversation with at least one other person within the first 30 minutes of gathering. The more, because trust is not something you can build looking at a screen of 20 people, right? You can't, there's not a way to connect. Trust is built through connections, through intimate connections. And so the more you can think about what questions you're asking folks, and that they're sharing something with each other, and that they're in smaller, intimate conversations, 2 to 3 people, that's the beginning of your building trust amongst the whole collective, right? That's part of emergent strategy, like the small impacting the large. So I wanted to name that as well. If you're kind of leaning into this move at the speed of trust, but keep going like, what does that mean? How do you actually do that? That's just one of the techniques that we use for trust building, and recognizing trust is about person-to-person building, because you can't build trust as a body unless there's an engagement between people. Now, moving into the framework that as a facilitator that Odin has brought to us, that I think is really, I found really valuable the minute I heard it, is called the I, we, it. And I want to shout out, because y'all know I love to quote brilliant living people, Ajiris Dixon, who is the principal at Vision Change Win. And I was being facilitated by Ajiris once, and they said, what looks like interpersonal difficulties is often systemic oppressions at play. Mm-hmm. And so how often are we looking at it and thinking these two people are banging against each other? But I, we, it gives us as facilitators a way to think about what is happening in the rooms that we're facilitating. So the I is the individual, it's the person. What does this person need? What are they going through in the moment? How are they showing up, and why are they showing up that way? Right? That could be, and we're not asking you to be people's therapists, like don't go down the road too deeply, but you do want to, as someone who is responsible for a well-being of a body, to think about, like, what does this person need? Are you about to jump in, Ashley?
No, your audio clicked up, but you're good.
Okay. What's happening with this individual in this moment? Like, what are they doing? How are they acting out, or how are they trying? What are they trying to get, right, from this moment? That individual is impacting the full room, right? The we, the collective. So what's happening with that individual is not just them, but you're looking around the room. So you may have someone who is in the midst of a full-blown, temper tantrum or something. And you're watching the rest of the room sort of roll their eyes, lean to, so you're getting a sense that, oh, this collective has seen this before, right? This is not new, they're not sure, or they may be hyper vigilant. They may be like, oh my God, what's happening, right? Like, so then your response as a facilitator, how is this impacting the we is really important, so that you can care for the room and think about, like, what is the movement I'm going to make? And then the it. What are the systemic oppressions at play? How is privilege showing up? How is power showing up? And in the midst of you thinking about how you want to address the scenario, what are you as a practitioner decolonizing, deconstructing, and building in the room? Right? So that's how, when I heard I, we, it, I began to think of it like, oh, okay. And I'm making this sound very smooth. These are muscles that we are building, folks. So this is a muscle that we're offering that you grow, of like how you can look at a room, see what's happening, and begin to make these associations quickly. The more you facilitate, the more you'll be able to lean into this practice of thinking about, oh, okay, so this person clearly needs to be seen because they are jumping in and sharing everything at all times, but that means they're eating up a lot of space that other people aren't getting to take up, and other people are like you're watching the rest of them scribble notes or trying to figure out how to, or they're whispering to each other, which means they don't feel like they have access to you. And if they don't feel like they have access to you as a facilitator to share what's going on, then there's something around the power dynamics in a room that means that they don't feel like they can interrupt this person, or they're feeling like they want to care for this person in a way that could be related to all types of systemic white supremacy, racism, ageism, all of those things that show up when we are in the bodies that we inhabit and together. So that's how, as a facilitator, I think about the I, we, it. I think it's a great framework to use and to help make decisions about what are the interventions that we need to make in rooms as facilitators that allow us to not treat people like they're disposable, right? Because sometimes you have someone who's hard or someone is, and you're like, oh, this person, right? But actually, what does it mean when we lean in and we can actually have a framework to treat, to address what's happening in the room that cares for the person, the collective, and also doesn't have us reinforcing ways of being that that create the world that we don't want to live in, reinforce ways of being.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sage. And I would just reflect, and as we go into our a little bit more of an open conversation around challenges and vulnerability, the I is all about the individual and what's happening, and it's also about your own leadership and your own facilitation and really looking inward and being able to be that grounded, trusted presence in any kind of a group dynamic. And so what I often do, there's a practice that I like to share with folks, both around facilitation and especially around challenging situations, called the 50-50 practice, which is simply paying attention to what's happening in the room and in the space and in your interaction with other people with about 50% of your energy, and then 50% of your energy going to check in with what's happening for you. Because oftentimes when we get into a tight moment or a conflict, or I'm not sure where to navigate in a challenge, whether that's with another person or with a group of people as a facilitator, we go all out or all in. And so being able to balance that is really helpful. And again, as Sage said, I think the I in the I, we, it framework really asks for that. And then the framework overall helps us balance that sense of, oh, this is about way more than just me or just this one person. And it's actually about way more than all of us. And so how do we see the work in the context of the system? And I often ask people as an intervention in meetings to do what I call, raising the bar, which is just coming back to vision, coming back to values. What's guiding us in doing this work? What's our really, really big goal? And that often can diffuse some of the challenge and get people engaged and excited and back on track.
Awesome. So we're one of the things that came up as we were prepping for this and having conversations was there was a lot of curiosity around, like, how do you deal with hard situations in the room? And so we're going to do two things right now, just to, again, giving you all more tools. We're going to model a fishbowl, which many of you may have seen in other places back in real life, where Odin, Sage, and I are going to have a conversation. And our prompt is, how do you deal with challenging situations and vulnerability as a facilitator? And what I'd like to invite the rest of you all to do at this moment is actually to turn your video off. And then you're also going to click on your little button, and you'll see there's a hide non-video participants option. And so what that'll do in Zoom land is actually just have the three of us on your screen. So if you click on your video, you can also click hide non-video participants in addition to hiding yourself. Yeah.
Here we are.
Great. Cool. I need to do that. How do I do that?
Like I don't have the option.
I wonder if we can't do it because look what we're learning.
There you go. That's a great lead in, Ashley. It's the upper right-hand corner of your, the three dots in the upper right. You just click on that and it should say hide non-video participants.
Mine, I think it maybe only comes up if I stop my video, then I can do it.
Oh, okay.
You know what? I think everybody else is good. So
Yeah.
we're just going to trust that folks are in seeing what they need to see right now.
Yeah.
So Odin and Sage, I'm curious. I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes.
Great.
And I'm curious, how do you deal with challenging situations and also your own vulnerability as a facilitator?
Yeah.
So I first and foremost, when I presence myself to the gift of a challenge in the room, right? Like I want to be really clear, and I appreciate Odin for the 50-50, that in my body, I am not treating this like it's a problem, right? That I am addressing what's happening in the room as part of generative tension, as part of conflict that is on its way to birth something else for this room to have, right? That may be very different than what I had intended. And that is beautiful and okay, and part of the co-creation of what it means when I walk into a room to facilitate with other human beings.
Yeah, I would say something very similar, which is I always use the metaphor of going on a whitewater rafting trip together. And as a facilitator, you're the guide, but you're in the boat, and you maybe have a sense of the river, and you have that feeling of like, okay, like we're definitely going to hit rapids. And so just like Sage was saying, or, you know, knowing that that's going to happen makes it a little easier to navigate it. And then the trick is like, how do you go with the flow with whatever comes up, and also keep moving down the river? And so I just anticipate that something's gonna like be off, or something is gonna need to shift, or we're gonna run really behind on time. Transparency. And I just feel like, yeah, there's going to be people who fall out of the boat, and how do we get them back up into the boat? So for me, it's just, and with my own vulnerability too, that's such an important place. I tend not to get nervous, and I tend to feel like, well, anything that happens, I don't start out saying, well, I'm going to mess up and I'll need to apologize or shift, but just holding that possibility that it's not going to go well and I'm only human, really helps deal with taking the pressure off of me and the group.
I totally get nervous. And I think it comes from a place of really not wanting to, both like the perfectionism of just like not wanting to fuck up, the holding with care, like wanting to just like hold things with care, and not cause harm. So there's a lot of like tenderness, and I can really get in my head about that stuff, which then I heard, I think it was Autumn Brown recently said this quote about talking about facilitation as failing in public with love. And just really being like, yeah, I'm gonna make some mistakes, and how can I do that and be both gentle with myself and hold myself accountable when that happens, and support the room in moving through whatever it needs to move through.
Part of that practice for me, Ashley, and I love Autumn Brown. If you're not familiar with Aorta, they're amazing. Is part of the unpacking of what white supremacist culture does to us, right? Like it makes us feel like we have to be perfect, like we have to. And what does it mean to, and as facilitators, we have a responsibility, and so does everyone else in the room, right? Like how do we flatten our hierarchies and move us outside of our perfectionism? And so even things like, you know, I appreciated when Odin was like, facilitation transparency. you know, or transparent facilitation moment. Folks do that all the time when they need to like lean to the side. And I'm like, hey, you know, I'm just, so this is what we're going to try. Like, I keep trying to use the language of experimentation. I keep trying to use the language of like, we are trying this together. There are, and for me, I find that really helpful in because I do get nervous as well, like in sort of alleviating the nervousness, because I have a collective that I can draw from, right? Like that we are, so my responsibility is that at the end of the day, like this group has to do something different, right? Like this, we're here because they're here to like do something different. And part of my lens as a facilitator is, how do I help them be different in order to get to the thing that we're doing, right? Like that is, and so the challenging situations are places for us to experiment and try. And I think that becomes really important for me personally, and for me to name in the room,
Yeah, Sage, I think there's this piece for me in terms of the challenging situations. I parallel that with the art of interruption, and it goes back to thinking about the who is in the room and what. It's like two things. It's like, how do I hold the potential for disruptors to actually be the things that can break us through to what's next, and hold that person, also like holding the piece of when how do I say this? It's like being able to discern when an intervention actually needs to happen and when it's actually moving the work forward in a way that's going to be transformative. And so there's a level of discernment, I think, at times that is about, I think it's, for me, it's like, how do I hold to the core of what's going to serve the greatest good of transformation for the group and the work, and myself. Like, I want to grow and change.
Yeah, I
admit it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's where that vulnerability comes in, and I think being able to say, to just, part of your one's role as a facilitator, and where I see my role, is being able to name those things that are happening in a way that gets us to talk about them constructively. And, you know, as you just said, Ashley, as Sage started out with, to not see conflict as something to contract around, but something to expand around. And how do we take it and say, hey, as a facilitator, I'm, you know, whether I'm at my current style, or I want to move toward my aspirational style, or I'm more experienced, I'm less experienced. But part of what we're doing here is providing tools. And if you have those tools, one of which is just preparation and knowing kind of who's in the space and what the issues are that might come up, then, you know, whether you're nervous or not, or however you want to frame that, or whether there's a big conflict or not, then you're prepared. And I think I used this quote last time from one of my teachers about, you know, it's not knowing what to do, it's knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. And that means like having something in your back pocket where you can pivot, because more often than not, you're going to need to pivot. There's going to be a conflict. There's going to be something that comes up around a different focus of the meeting. And it's like, oh, we're supposed to be talking about this, but really we need to be talking about this before we can talk about that. So are we going to go there now? Or are we going to just sit with the tension and trying to like keep forcing the issue rather than, again, going with the flow? But that helps us keep moving at the same time.
I love that. Like, and I think that what we are getting into is this kind of nuance of care and its relationship to transformation, right? Like there's I love a quote by Mary Hooks, who's the director of song, and she does this mandate, and part of what she says is to be transformed in the service of the work, right? Like, so that we are constantly in the midst of not only ourselves and our personal transformation, but of folks in the room. And I think, Ashley, you know, and kind of going back to something, the way I heard Maria's kind of like transformation, and I'm in my mind imagining like what happens when someone is in a puddle of tears in the room, right? Like, so there's so many ways like that a room can want to lean in, but you can take a cue from the room of like how this happens. You know, if everyone else who knows this person is sort of like, you know, sitting back and like letting this happen, or, you know, they've checked out, then that's a message, right? Like that's a message. And you also, you know, want to think about the ways in which care is weaponized, or like tears and emotion can be weaponized. And so where these are the kind of nuances in the moment as a facilitator, you're like, oh, do I actually address this person? And like, what seems to be pulling away? Like, because our natural inclinations around like empathy and like, oh my goodness, this person is in the midst of a crying jag. But this is where as facilitators, where we take a step back and we have a lens for the room. We have, again, I, me, we have a lens for the way privilege, oppressions, and power show up. And we step back and sometimes we say, okay, if you need to step out, you know, please do, or here's some tissue, and we're moving through, right? Like, and we're not going to stop it, and we're not going to stop everything and care for this person in the moment while they're having their emotions. We're actually going to give them an opportunity for a transformative moment in that, right? Like to have a different experience with the ways in which the world can be, that says you are whole, you are fine, and you're going to be okay, and you actually don't need me to do that. Even though you've been trained to think you do, you really don't. And the rest of us, when you're ready to enter back in, we are here to hold you and be with you.
Right? One of the meeting agreements that I have appreciated around that one in particular is tissue issues. Just being like acknowledging those, and like if you need a tissue, you have the capacity to ask for one, and so rather than the assumption of people caring for you, so yeah. So we've like hit our little 10-minute mark, and so I'm wondering, facilitator friends, if we can move into maybe scenarios. So that we can give folks some time.
Yeah, that would be great. And there's a lot of content that we have in a deck for today, which we've shared with you. And I just encourage you to look at that and the agenda and go, you know, into some of those resources, which offer a lot more detail. And ultimately, I always say, you know, trying to learn facilitation from, you know, webinar is like trying to learn to ride a bike from a PowerPoint. So, you know, ultimately this section that we're moving into is going to be way more productive. So because you'll be dealing with issues live and in real time.
And I just want to highlight in that deck, slide 19 has the elements of emergent strategy. So again, as you're thinking about what your intervention is, or like what your movement might be in a challenging situation, how does it actually bring more possibility? How is it interdependent? How is it decentralized, in what ways? And then slide 32, which is the tenets for principled struggle. How do you bring people back into a question asking mode, or how do you bring yourself back into questions and move through struggle?
Great. Yes, there's some really juicy things in between slides 33 and 29 that may give you some little breadcrumbs to help you as you are doing your scenarios. So on slide 34, in a moment, you're going to go into a breakout group for 20 minutes there'll be 4 of you together. So again, this is an example of like, get folks into small groups to go deeper, build relationships. Your invitation is there are 5 scenarios on slide 34. Just pick one of them and decide how you would tackle it if you were the facilitator. Maybe not tackle. Roll around with.
Welcome back, everyone. Almost everyone? Everyone? Oh. Okay. Well, I hope that felt good to you all, to really just have an opportunity to talk about, given you all's experience and what you've heard, how you would begin to massage it. I just want to reinforce that this training isn't a how to do facilitation. These are the ways that through your experience, your identity, through the way in which you want to move, that you are shaping your specific facilitation practice. So hopefully that as you were thinking about your scenario planning, you were also connecting it to the facilitation practice that you want to have, that we asked you to name in the beginning, right? So that you can kind of pull these things together and begin to weave them so that the way in which you're strategizing, moving inside difficult situations are still connected to the goals that you want to have as a facilitator, who you want to be as a facilitator. So let's hear what happened. I'm going to ask folks to share. Oh, I lost, I had the breakout room for a minute, but I lost the breakout room. So I'm going to ask folks to share by room, by breakout room. Ella, do you still have the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I was just going to mention who is in each one to you.
Fabulous. And you'll let us know which scenario you chose. And then what did you all come up with? I'm super excited to hear that.
I think the first room was Aaron, Linda, Safarna.
Oh, okay. That's great. We can do by in order. So Aaron, Linda, and Safar, pronounce that for me, please. Wonderful. Well, since you're speaking, hey, how you doing?
We actually tackled 4 different scenarios.
In 20 minutes. Okay.
We did.
Listen.
Do you want to start, Linda, with your specific one, the first one?
Your availability down below.
Sure. So I shared that I have been in the first situation on the left, and where 2 people are like rebutting each other. And what the facilitator did was actually, it wasn't addressed in the moment, but like they changed who was in the meetings, like moving forward, and like made space for, it's because there was like a hierarchy with like those 2 people, and so the participants didn't feel like encouraged to like engage in that. And so the facilitator had the subsequent meeting like just be with the rest of the group and made space for the 2 to have the conversation outside of the space. And then we like reconvened afterward. But I think even though it wasn't addressed like in the moment, I think it helped shift the dynamic moving forward and make like aware to the 2 people like how that dynamic was affecting the rest of the group. And so when we reconvened as the larger group again, I think it shifted a bit. So, yeah.
Was there a naming of the way power was showing up in the full room when you all were all together? And on the subsequent coming back together, was there an explanation to the full body of what had happened to make it different?
Not like when it happened, but in explaining why the meeting was going to be different, why the next meeting was going to be different, there was that acknowledgement. And then in the next meeting where we reconvened, the 2 like acknowledged that also. So I think it was like a moment of like transformation in terms of holding space for the group and seeing the different dynamics. So.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to group 1. That's why we asked y'all to do it so that we could, and I know y'all did 3 more, but I want to get through all the groups and then we'll come back if folks have done more, okay? But thank you, Linda, for getting us started. That was wonderful. So group 2 is Catherine, Alethea, and Maria. Which scenario did you all choose?
Pretty much available.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Maria, you go.
Okay, I feel like so I think I was triggered actually because it reminded me of situations I'd been in. So we chose a scenario where they'd gone through a consensus process and were almost ready to wrap it all up, and then a person raised objections, and so I think I was triggered because I remember just really, even like as we talked about the scenario, feeling a lot of ownership over the consensus process as a facilitator and feeling like I had done it just right. And how could this have just gone sideways on me? And so it was actually, as we talked with Catherine and Alethea, I had to just kind of think like, oh, wait, it was a process. And so we went back to the slide around dealing with difficult dynamics and just like how to let go of the process. So I think like as a facilitator, just psychologically letting go of like, maybe that was perfect in my head and, you know, now I need to shift. So we talked about how probably restructuring, not just restructuring a process, but we didn't necessarily identify how we would restructure it. And I think as a facilitator, again, the importance of detaching from the process in that moment, the original process, and being able to separate self from the work. And then maybe approaching ways to kind of see whether or not there were actual like trust issues in the room that we just hadn't really like tested for before, and maybe doing some deeper trust work with the group to re-engage in a new process. And Catherine, now, Alethea, did I miss anything?
Oh, I think you covered it.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would offer is sometimes when you have someone who sometimes are curmudgeonly in the room, like this person who's like always trying to be contrary, a way that to support their, because what they're showing up is their need for to be seen and to be seen as powerful, right? And so if you can give them something else to do, right? And be like, okay, so if this is what goes through, we're going to need to figure out what the next steps are. Carl, can you help us, you know, can you while on lunch, like come up with a scenario that might show up that we can then plan for, right? Like, so if you kind of redirect them to place that scenario planning, which is often like dystopian, in a slightly different direction, that helps you get through the consensus process in a way that doesn't just ignore them, but allows the group to continue to move forward and gives them somewhere to put that energy, right? Like, so it's especially if they have like homies, like a little contrarian circle, give them something to do together. And group, I want to make sure we end on time. Can we get group 4? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped group 3. Heather, Layla, Marley, and Sadia. Can you tell us what you chose as your...
I can go unless Layla, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to?
Go ahead and start it off, Marlene. I could.
Okay. Yeah. So we chose the scenario where we're holding a meeting on November 6th. And trying to get back to the slide here. And decisions need to be made, but we know everybody's in a really challenging space. And I think one of the things that we talked about was making sure that we open the meeting acknowledging what everyone has been going through and the fears and trauma that people might be dealing with, and providing ample time and space to talk about that, to share those where they're at in advance of shifting to focused decision making.
Yeah, and so like more of the structure of the meeting was to start with an activity like how we did this meeting, like a mindfulness activity, and then moving into like a small group discussion where people are able to share how they're feeling, and then also how what's going on in the world or in our nation, how that is related to the work that we're trying to accomplish specifically for this meeting or for the meeting that's going on. Marley also brought up the idea of thinking about how to end the meeting as well, ending the meeting with a mindfulness activity to kind of help people transition from the current meeting into their next meeting. Because Heather brought up the point where people are in back-to-back meetings. So helping people kind of, now that they're present at this meeting, helping people kind of close out and give them closure from this meeting, and helping them transition in an easier way to their next thing. So those are kind of the things that we talked about.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the mindfulness of it all. I think the one thing I would offer is also, how are those things connected, right? Making sure as a facilitator, it doesn't feel like, oh, we're processing, now we're going to stop processing, and now we're going to move to decision making. But really, how in the world that you all are imagining now, like post November 6th, what role does that play in the decision making that we have to do today, right? Like, so keeping that way you don't lose the container completely, and you make plenty of space for folks to be able to. But by the way, both of y'all have great backgrounds, and so, and thank you so much. And number four, group four is group four still here? I see some folks leaving because we're close to time.
Yeah, I see Miriam and Philip if you're willing to share.
Sure. And Miriam, jump in if you'd like as well. So we did the consensus derailing kind of conversation as well. And just to like add, because I think we touched on similar things that the previous group and Sage mentioned. I guess one thing is like, that we thought would be useful to think about is how much was this person participating in the conversation beforehand? So is this someone who wants to be contrarian and play devil's advocate? Like, is it about their ego to some degree, or is it someone who didn't participate really much at all and was holding something back and then just was like, oh, I have to say this because I can't in good conscience kind of let this go forward? And so those would be really different paths, I think, in terms of responding as a facilitator. We talked a bit about how to do like a temperature check on that person's opinion and try and see whether other people feel that way without making it a whole new conversation, like trying to think of a quick way to do that, like thumbs up, thumbs sideways, down kind of thing. And then lastly, just like potentially having a sidebar conversation with that person later, just to make sure they don't feel like their opinion was stepped over or ignored.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that nuance, because that is very different approaches to this person, depending upon whether or not they're just, some folks are slow. I acknowledge I'm a slow processor. Sometimes I'm in rooms, I'm like, oh, wait. You know, like by the time I formulated, they have run down the road, right? And then what does that mean around folks who process differently, to feel like they have some sort of engagement that doesn't feel like it derails everything, but also that they don't feel left out. So thank you, Philip and Miriam for uplifting that, because that can also be a dynamic in the room. Y'all are brilliant. I'm so excited. Hope you've shared some new things, that you have access to the slide deck even when we're not meeting. So, you know, just kick it around with your friends around the lunch table, right? Like, what would you think? And then please continue to use this as a way to build your toolkit, and you can go back to them over and over again. Right? And I'm going to pass to Odin to close us.
Yeah, so we're right at time, and I wanted to thank everyone for your time today and for showing up to this. And I just want to encourage you, as Sage was just saying, to think about the tools that we've shared with you today and over time, and think about what you want to practice moving forward. And perhaps even beyond the tool, because as we've said, this is not just about how to facilitate, it's really about the way of being when you're facilitating. Think about that current and aspirational style that you have, and what would it be like to move toward that aspirational style, and what can support you. So I wanted to thank you. I'm actually I'm going to be away next week, so you will be with Sage and with Ashley. I will not be joining you, but it's been wonderful being with you for these first three sessions. And next time you're going to be talking about closing a meeting and what happens after, and to really kind of ground folks, even in situations where maybe people are not feeling grounded, and then what follow-up looks like. So I see that there's, yeah, great. There's some questions and responses going in the chat. And these are also pieces that you can continue to chat about next time. There'll be some coaching opportunities there as well. So have a great week. Thank you, everyone. And be well. And remember to look up from your screens occasionally and have a little breather. So take care, all.